Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Higashi, and on behalf of Security and Forrester Research, I'd like to welcome you and say thank you for attending today's webcast titled PrivacyOps, Rethinking Privacy Compliance as CCPA Becomes Reality. Leading off today's discussion will be Heidi Shey, Principal Analyst at Forrester Research. Following Heidi will be Rehan Jalil, CEO of Security. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. In order to participate, to ask a question, you'll see on the bottom of your screen a QA button. If you click on that, in the pop-up, type your questions and comments in the box. We will try to answer as many as time permits. A replay of the recorded webinar will be sent following the webinar to watch on demand and to share with colleagues. Here's today's agenda, which will conclude with a live Q&A. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Heidi Shey.
Thank you so much. And hello, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. So I'm Heidi Shey, Principal Analyst at Forrester Research, focusing on data security as well as privacy within my research. And I'm part of a team here at Forrester who focuses on different aspects of security and privacy. So we've got folks who look after governance, risk, and compliance, as well as data privacy, and also privacy and marketing, as well as our ad tech. And so today I'm here to talk to you about privacy and trust and how this is really a customer experience opportunity. So don't think of CCPA as only a compliance-driven thing that you have to focus on. All right, so your organization, it exists today because of who you serve, your customers. It's about people. And customers like you and me, we have expectations about the companies that we do business with, the products that we buy. And to stay competitive, we have to recognize that these customer expectations, they change over time. And we have to do what we can as an organization to meet those expectations. So think of buying a car. So if you're buying a car today, you're going to expect to have power windows in this thing. You push a button to open and close your car window, and you're not using a hand crank to do so, right? And there are different factors here that will go on and influence how our expectations change over time. For example, one factor is technology. So advances in technology, they set a new bar for what is now standard in products and how we use them. Smartphones are a great example. Another factor is personalization. And personalization, hopefully without being creepy, sets a new bar for how we expect companies to interact with us. Our expectations for offerings that we want that are relevant to our needs. Expectations for companies to then delight us with the experiences that they create. And increasingly today, privacy and growing awareness of privacy, as well as privacy abuses like missteps by companies and abuse of information, has an impact as well. And it's a lot more visible. Like an example I saw recently about customers who went to a steakhouse, a restaurant in California, getting handed a paper privacy notice. Or what we see when we go to different types of websites. Now we get notifications about consent and use of cookies. And these are all regulations that are aimed at protecting consumer privacy. And these rights that they have now, they set a new bar for companies when it comes to fulfilling these privacy rights of their customers and how they design those experiences. Plain old avocado toast, it's great, but it's not enough anymore when customers start to expect more. And so with CCPA, as well as other privacy regulations, you really have this open field in front of you. That grass, it's going to keep growing. So you have to be ready to do something about it. This readiness to fulfill customer rights it's paramount. So a push mower and manual processes, they just might not be sufficient for what you need here. So you need to start thinking about different tools and processes that can help you when it comes to fulfilling these customer rights. And with CCPA top of mind, here's a view into a study that Forrester conducted in 2019, where we asked marketers about CCPA compliance and whether they agreed with these following statements. So we saw that a good amount of folks, 41%, indicated that yes, they've trained their marketing and business colleagues for compliance with CCPA. 37% said, yes, we've allocated budget for compliance, which is great. 35%, we are able to handle these different types of requests, whether it's data access, deletion, or portability across all of their marketing systems and vendors, which is great, but it kind of makes you wonder, well, what happened to the other folks? And then also keep in mind that these are US marketing decision makers answering this question. We may get different results talking to others within the enterprise. So we did. We asked US security decision makers like CISOs and those in charge of security and compliance, their view on compliance with CCPA. And what they told us at that point was, this is around mid-2019, 31% said that their organizations were fully compliant, while 14% said it would be in another 12 months. So taken together, this is somewhat encouraging because companies, they've really taken steps forward to prepare. But it also shows us that many more are just not ready today. And for those who aren't ready, you've got some runway, but not a lot, especially if we consider some of the lessons that we've learned here from GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation in Europe, and how consumers have responded to that. So yes, more data. So GDPR adopted in 2016, went into effect in 2018. And so in 2019, so this is an annual survey that we do as well with consumers, online adults in varying countries, different countries. We saw that in 2019, the percentage of consumers by country who had heard of GDPR it's still pretty scattered. You see these different varying levels of awareness, Germany being at the highest level, and then it kind of starts to taper off at that point. But even in places like, let's say, Italy, you have almost half of the population saying that they've heard of GDPR. And so if we look to the UK as an example, so here, 2019, 76% said they have heard of GDPR. But what about folks who actually wanted to exercise their rights? So this is our 2018 data for the UK. We don't have the 2019 results yet, but in 2018, when we asked people, how likely would you be to do any of the following things to exercise your rights, this is what they told us. So it's a good amount, right? We see that 50 to 52%, a little over half, said they would be likely to request a copy of the information that companies had about them. A little more than that would want to ask companies to correct or update information. 63% would be willing to ask companies to delete information about them. And 62% request that companies not profile them for marketing purposes. So you can consider this having to do with opt-out. Now with CCPA, you'll have a variety of consumer rights to fulfill. And just a note, I am not a lawyer, so this is not legal advice, but informational content here. So notice and disclosure, the right to be able to let people know what you have collected about them or are about to collect, why you're doing it, what you'll do with this information, and what their rights are as consumers. Right of access, providing consumers access to their information when they request it at no cost, and making it in a format that's portable, readily usable. Opt out, giving people the right to opt out of data collection and do so at any time. The right to delete, so giving folks the ability to request that you delete their information, and also directing your service provider partners to do the same with information that you've shared with them. And also non-discrimination, against consumers who do choose to exercise their rights with you. So what this means is you can't deny people goods or services because they're trying to exercise their rights here, or charge them higher prices for the same goods or services, or giving them different quality goods and services, or suggesting this at all. So a lot of different components here, different types of rights and things that you need to consider and be able to prepare for in order to fulfill. And while, yes, you need to recognize that these are obligations you have to do, you also have to see that they can come with new risks as well. Firms, you'll see fines and penalties for non-compliance. This is a piece of it. With the breach, this failure to be able to implement and maintain reasonable security procedures and practices, this carries a potential of up to $750 per consumer per incident, or actual damages, whichever is greater. And even without a breach, there are still the possibility of civil penalties, up to $2,500 per violation of CCPA. Or if this was some type of intentional violation, this could be up to $7,500 for each. So you can see how these penalties, these fines can add up, but they're not the only risks that come out. What happens when you fulfill consumer rights incorrectly? Done incorrectly, you could have a breach on your hands. For example, if you were to send person A's data to person B. Or in another scenario, done incorrectly, you may also inadvertently facilitate abuse. For example, if someone's stalker or abuser were to be able to request the victim's data from your company. Now, neither of these are events that you want to have tied to your brand. And then there's also the requirement, to fulfill these requests, they can also be used against you. So think of a situation where you just get flooded with requests for access or deletion, where you have maybe angry customers doing this. Or maybe after a security incident or a breach, you've got people who are now curious and also want to make these types of requests. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a security incident or a breach at your company. It could be one of your competitors. It could be another company that's within your industry, for example. You can have more customers who are inclined to make those kinds of requests after such an event. Ultimately, privacy and how you fulfill consumer rights is a customer experience opportunity. Now, what this means is that a checkbox approach to compliance is not going to be enough. You can be compliant and still fail at customer experience. If that's the case, then, well, what's required for success? 3 key things. One, to start off, is surfacing intelligence of personal information. So what is this data? Where is it? Who does it belong to? Questions like, why do you have this information? Being able to answer, how does this data flow? And also, how current is your view and visibility of this data? So all of this intelligence, this visibility, this is the foundation for your ability to fulfill data rights. And it's a foundation for being agile in how you respond to new privacy regulations as well as changes in privacy regulation, wherever you may do business around the globe. Because more and more countries are looking at GDPR-style regulation. And the current approaches for how you do this, it's kind of challenging. A lot of organizations I see, they still try to do this manually, maybe through internal surveys or questionnaires with different business unit owners and departments, or some form of, let's say, manual data mapping, which might tell you how you think data should ideally move across your organization rather than how it actually does. So these challenges, we've got siloed visibility, right? Tools, you'll see that they often have a focus on specific data sources or certain data types. So you might have to end up using multiple tools to then cobble together a view of your environment. These current approaches are also often snapshot in time. You get one point in view, and it's not really real time. So what you're working with to make decisions on and to do things, it could already be outdated. And this last one, this challenge is about repurposed features. So what I mean by that is that these capabilities for discovering, for identifying data, you're going to see them in many different types of tools. Sometimes the technology, the tool, it may have been designed for another purpose and is now marketed for GDPR or CCPA compliance. And while the technology can still apply and be used here, I think you also have to look at the rest of what it is that you're purchasing to see if, is this an appropriate fit? Or are you buying more than you need to for this use case? All right, so surfacing intelligence of personal info, one key to success. The second is expanding your view of the data's lifecycle and looking beyond your organization. Being able to answer questions like, where does your data come from? You know, is your company an intermediary that passes data on elsewhere? And how do you manage these third parties, these service providers that would be processing your customer data or your employee data? And this is important, not just for understanding your third-party risk, but also understanding your role and relationship with the data versus your service provider partners, so you can go on to fulfill consumer rights correctly. CCPA is going to require that you collaborate and orchestrate your processes with these service provider partners to fulfill your customers' rights. And then the consideration here is, well, you need to do it in a way that's not going to add more work to the process and create more data sprawl in your efforts, like a lot of back and forth emails or maybe creating copies of the data. That's something you want to try to avoid if possible. And then you'll also need to be able to validate compliance here, documenting, logging your activities and progress with fulfilling requests. All right, so 2 keys to success. Here's the third. The third key is including privacy in your customer journey mapping. So journey maps, they enable your organization to see how a customer interacts with your company and the journey that they take from what is it that they do to learn maybe more about your products and services, to purchasing something or signing up for an account, to the whole experience of reaching out when they have issues or questions and so on. As you do this type of mapping, think through and identify, well, what are the points in that customer journey where you are collecting data and why? And then also, what is it that you communicate to people and how do you communicate to your customers at that point, especially regarding consent and opt-out? And then how is it do you communicate your privacy responsibilities to your customers, and how is it that you'll go through fulfilling their rights? So what does that process look like for you internally on the back end, but then also think about what that experience would be to a customer on the outside looking in. So as you do this, you really need to consider your audience, the customer, their needs, their preferences, from looking at demographics to different types of customer segmentation. And then also consider scalability. And that's scalability on your end for how is it that you support your customers through this journey and in fulfilling their rights. It's going to be one thing if you have, let's say, several hundred customers. It's another when you have several hundreds of thousands of customers.